Okay, this is part three of my little history lesson, if you will, into American history. Now, I was actually kind of perusing through George Washington's farewell address, 1796, September the 17th. Um, I found a couple of interesting statements, not the one I was looking for, uh, but here's something he said about the war in Europe. It says this: in relation to the still subsisting war in Europe, my proclamation of 1793-04-22 is the index to my plan. Sanctioned by your approving voice and by that of your representatives in both houses of Congress, the spirit of that measure has continually governed me, uninfluenced by any attempts to detour or divert me from it. Now watch. After deliberate examination, with the aid of the best lights I could obtain, I was well satisfied that our country, under all the circumstances of the case, had a right to take and was bound in duty and interest to take a neutral position. Having taken it, I determined as far as should be. Let me do that again. Having taken it, I determined as far as should depend upon me to maintain it with moderation, perseverance, and firmness. In other words, they stayed out of the war in Europe. Why? Because it did not involve the United States. That is why. And so again, oh, here's the one I was looking at. Why forego the advantages of so peculiar a situation? Why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice? Now watch. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world, so far, I mean, as we are now at liberty to do it. For let me not be understood as capable of patronizing infidelity to existing engagements. I hold the maxim no less applicable to public than to private affairs, that honesty is always the best policy. Well, you know where that comes from now, George Washington. I repeat, therefore, let those engagements be observed in their genuine sense, but in my opinion it is unnecessary and would be unwise to extend them. And so basically what he's saying here in this short little part here is that we have no business being involved in Europe, and actually by getting involved, that's going to put our destiny and our liberty and our prosperity in jeopardy. And look at us today. Look at us today. The proof is in the pudding, ladies and gentlemen. Look at where we've come in the last 180 or so years, as we have continually found ourselves getting involved in the wars and skirmishes of other nations. Instead of making the United States more safe, more prosperous, giving us more liberty, it's actually done quite the opposite. We are less safe. We have less liberty. We have less prosperity. We are taxed to the hilt. We have now so-called government that claims to be looking out for our best interest, when the fact and the reality is they're looking out for two things. Well, three. They're looking out for the banks, they're looking out for the corporations, and they're looking out for themselves. They couldn't care less about you and I, ladies and gentlemen. That is a fact. You and I are nothing more to them than a means to their end, by working like a slave to fund the very type of actions that most of us don't agree with. And I've said this before and I will say it again. I am against all of these actions, but I support the troops. I support the men and women who are in uniform, but I do not support the way they're being used. And actually, abused is more of the correct term today. And for those that if you're in uniform, and I was there, and I was very, very proud of my service, and I thought that everything that I was doing was right, and as I have thought these things through, studied these things out, I've realized that I was just another pawn in the game of chess, and that I was serving corporate interests and not actual literal freedom of American people. And I don't know that I would change anything that I have done. And yes, when I was in, we did do good in other countries. When we were in the Philippines, for example, I remember working in orphanages and repairing buildings and painting and doing things like that in schools. So there were good things that we did, and I know that our American military to this day still continue to do those good things around the world. But does that make up for the bad things that we do? That's kind of a hard pill to swallow. Again, as I look at this, unless our nation is attacked on our soil, why are we involved in all of these other nations to the extent to where we are? And that is a question that no one seems to be able to answer. But I really want to get to the grassroots of the purpose of these videos. As time went on, and as people in this young country of ours realized that when they were going to declare their independence, and by the way, it was a declaration, it was not a request, it was an absolute. They were saying, listen, we are no longer accepting your form of law, your form of rule, and we are declaring ourselves independent from your laws. And see, guys, here's the thing. We have a rule of law here. The rule of law in our nation is called the Constitution. And just as the King of England violated the Magna Carta, so too has our government, and this is local, state, and federal, have kicked our Constitution to the curb. And there's many people who ask, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? What did the founders of this nation do? They declared a state of independence from that tyrannical rule. Something I want to bring up at this point is it wasn't everybody. There were people in those colonies who were called loyalists. They were loyal to this tyrannical government, believe it or not. And I think it's because it's what they knew. We would call them the zombies today, because they were programmed to think that this was the way of life, and there was nothing they could do about it. And they weren't fully on board with defending themselves against this tyrannical government. They were actually accepting of it. And we see the same thing today, and it's tragic that we do. And we're doing everything we can to wake these people up so that they understand that you are a slave to the federal government. You are a slave to the state government. You are a slave to your county government. What do you do when the flashing lights come up behind you? You pull over. When they demand that you do this and do that and do everything else under the sun, even though you've broken no actual law, you do exactly what you're told. Isn't that what a slave does? Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen. We are in tough times. We are in tough times. We are in a time where we are going to have to make a decision. Are we going to be a loyalist, or are we going to be a freedom fighter? A true patriot. One who does whatever is necessary to fight for the rights of not only ourselves, but our children and our children's children. In the preamble of the Constitution, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. See, there's no justice right now. There's no liberty right now. There's no tranquility right now. If you fear the government, you're under tyranny. If the government fears you, you're under freedom. Which are we under, ladies and gentlemen? If you're afraid of losing your property for not paying property taxes, is that fear or freedom? If you're afraid of your wages being garnished because you're not paying some out of control private corporation known as the Internal Revenue Service, is that freedom? Is that liberty? Or is that fear? If you're afraid of carrying a gun because to protect yourself, because you might be shot for the fact that you're carrying a gun, is that freedom? Or is that tyranny? You see, we have duped ourselves to believing that we're living under freedom. We've duped ourselves to believing that we have choices. Oh, you have minute choices, but really they're just an illusion. There are no real choices at all. And this is where we are, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to shut this video off here and start my last segment, and I'm going to finish this up in the next video.